Welcome back. This video will cover Learning Objective 7.3 for Chapter 7, Attitudes and Attitude Change for PSY 235, Social Psychology. In this part of the chapter, we'll be talking about how internal and external factors lead to attitude change. Now, what do we mean by attitude change? The simple answer to that is anytime your feelings, your evaluation of an attitude object moves from, say, positive to negative or from negative to positive. It's not, an either or. Imagine it as a sliding scale when your attitudes move in one direction versus the other. Attitudes sometimes do change. If you've lived as long as you have, some of your own attitudes have shifted toward objects in your environment, toward people. Think about a time when you used to really like someone and then something happened and you don't like them anymore. That is an attitude change. So attitudes change often, and sometimes they change because of social influence. Sometimes they change because of experience, things that we encounter with the attitude object, but often attitude change comes through social exposures. Our attitudes towards everything, as your authors put it, presidential candidates, brands of laundry, type of cereal that you eat in the morning, whatever, those attitudes can be influenced by what other people around you do or say. Sometimes change comes from facts, cognitions, content. Sometimes it comes just through sheer emotion. Sometimes it's through making inferences based on our own behaviors. So attitudes this is the real reason why we really want to understand the social psychology of attitude formation, because often we want to move people's attitudes in one direction or another. If you're a marketer, you want to move people in the direction of positive attitudes towards your product. If you're a politician, you want to move people's attitudes toward positive feelings toward them as a candidate. And you want to move them in the direction of negative attitudes towards their opponent. If you're going out on a date, you want to encourage the person that you're going on the date with to see you as a nice person. So there, you're trying to influence them to have positive attitudes towards you, and so on. There are lots of theories that have been proposed for helping us understand attitude change. One of those is cognitive dissonance theory. We talked about this in a previous chapter. Remember what dissonance is. Cognitive dissonance is this uncomfortable feeling that you get when you have two cognitions, two thoughts, perhaps an attitude, and then a reflection on your behavior, or maybe it's two attitudes that are just not consistent with one another. Attitude change, as was demonstrated in some of the classic research that we covered in the cognitive dissonance chapter, really reflects, situations where we catch ourselves doing something that goes against our stated attitudes. And if we don't have enough really good reasons for that, like we haven't been coerced, we haven't been paid a lot, we don't have, an easily accessible darn good reason for behaving counter-attitudinally, our attitudes will often subtly shift. They won't go, flip-flop from totally negative to totally positive, but they'll move. So dissonance theory is one way of explaining attitude change. Now, just to refresh your memory, people experience a lot of dissonance if they do something that threatens their self-image, their view of themselves as decent, kind, honest, smart, whatever. And there's no way they can explain it away as being due to their circumstances, like that they've been paid a lot, or they've been pressured, they've been coerced. When you can't find a good external explanation, then you will have to come up with a different reason so that you will restore your sense of yourself as rational, of kind, honest, decent, smart, and so on. And then by doing that, you can bring your cognitions closer together. So here, it's your attitude, how you feel about the object. And then the other is your inferences about your own behavior. So let's say that you have always said, and this isn't not the best example, but I am notorious for saying that I do not like country music. But then a particular song may just be a banger, and I just really like it. And it just happens to be a country artist. And then I'm in a situation where I have dissonance. No one forced me to listen to the song. It just happened to be there, maybe in the background of a TikTok or whatever. And I hear it, and it's really good, and I like it, and I like to hear it again. But then I'm like, wait a minute, this is country music. I've always said I don't like country music. Well, then I need to make an adjustment. So instead of saying I hate all country music, I adjust the attitude and say, well, some of it's fine. Some of it's good. So you see, it doesn't have to be, oh, suddenly I'm now everybody's all-time country music fan. It's more just a subtle adjustment that's due to dissonance. And it's an opening of the mind that says, yeah, well, some of it can be enjoyable. Another way that dissonance can encourage attitude change is something called counter-attitudinal advocacy. And counter-attitudinal advocacy involves people being induced. They can be encouraged, asked, invited, or they can be paid, coerced, whatever, to state an opinion that goes against their attitudes. Now, if they are asked to do it, and they are not coerced to do it, they state an attitude that goes against their privately held attitudes, this can cause dissonance. So a lot of the classic research has involved doing a pre-attitude assessment. So some of the early research in this was asking people about attitudes towards communism. So some of this research was done in the 1950s. So they would ask college students for a pre-assessment of their attitudes about a whole bunch of topics. One of them was attitudes about communism. And in that time period, it was very common for people to have very, very, very negative attitudes towards communism. That's still pretty much true in the United States. Then they were put into an experimental condition where they were asked to deliver a statement that was very positive about communism. So they were asked to deliver a pre-written speech, and that speech was counter to their own attitudes. In some of these early studies, they were actually asked to provide a persuasive communication to another person. And they were asked to, really play it up, give this argument with your whole chest and, share it with this other person. If they've done that and they don't have good external justification for why they've done it. So, think back to that $20 versus $1 manipulation in the classic dissonance studies. If they were given $20 to give the pro-communism speech to another person, then they have plenty of external justification. They have no need to change their private attitude. They're like, why did I give this speech so passionately? Because they gave me $20. And I can use that to buy beer. If, however, they're given insufficient external justification, no payment, they're just doing it as a favor to you, then, and they don't even know you, then they have to look at their own actions and say, the argument about communism, that actually has some merit. So they may move, and the way they test it is they test the attitudes after the fact. And what's found is that they may go from strongly opposed to communism to somewhat less strongly opposed. So if you imagine a 7-point scale, they may move from a 7, strongly opposed, to a 5.5 opposed, right? So it's moving that needle into a slightly different direction, in the direction of the counter-attitudinal statement that you've made. This is, in some ways, persuasive communications take advantage of dissonance, but not always. Persuasive communications come in a lot of different forms. What we're most familiar with is, advertising campaigns and political ads. But persuasive communications are things that you can face interpersonally all the time, like your friends trying to convince you to go to a party when you should be studying. That's also a persuasive communication. There have been lots of theoretical models. Probably the most commonly used one is called the Yale Attitude Change Approach. And basically this model involves looking at the conditions that people are going to experience that are most likely to lead to attitude change when they are exposed to a persuasive message. And this attitude change approach includes, looking at who's delivering the message, what the message is, and who the audience is. What are their basic tendencies? What are their basic attitudes, beliefs, and values? So when you break those three things down, you can manipulate any of the three components. You can manipulate the source. Maybe they're a highly attractive source, a highly credible source, a very well-known source. The nature of the communication can be manipulated. Is it delivered in an affective way? Is it delivered with lots of facts and figures? Is it delivered in a way that's funny or serious? That's the nature of the communication itself. And then you have to look at the audience. What are their current attitudes? What are their current behavioral tendencies? And all of those things can affect the degree to which a particular persuasive communication is going to be effective. So if we break this down, the source of the communication is the who question. And the variables, there are many variables that you can look at with source. But you can look at credibility, attractiveness, things like a sleeper effect. All of those factors, like credibility, for example, there are lots of medical advertisements, medication advertisements. Sometimes it's advertisements encouraging people to change their behaviors. A credible source would be a medical professional, someone with a medical degree. Sometimes advertisements will have false credibility. Like they'll have an actor and there will be a little, if you pay attention, there will be a little kind of statement at the bottom. This is an actor playing a role. So you'll have an attractive person in a lab coat or in a medical coat and with a stethoscope and a badge, and they'll look very credible. They'll look like a medical representative. But at the bottom of the screen it'll say this is a paid source, not an actual medical professional. Credibility is often mixed with attractiveness as a way of manipulating the source of a communication to make them more persuasive. The what component is the nature of the communication. Sometimes messages are highly targeted. They go toward a specific type of population or a particular area, a context. Sometimes communications are two-sided, where you have messages about pros and cons. That's particularly common in political messaging, where you have the candidate is making their argument and comparing it to the other side's arguments. The communication, you can also manipulate whether or not you're going to present the attitude you want them to move to early or late, and those are primacy and recency effects. Now, I'm not going to take the time here to go through every single one of those. You can review those in your text as we go forward. And then the nature of the audience. There are lots of variables that can get in the way of people absorbing your message. Sometimes it's their personality. Sometimes it's the degree to which they are currently dug in on their attitudes that you're trying to change. Sometimes it's the way they're likely to respond to a particular message that you're sending. Even the words that you choose to use can be problematic. And also, just situational things like, are they highly distractible? And right now, think about how you consume advertising. Sometimes you are doing other things. Like if I sit down with my husband and watch TV, even if we're just watching a sporting event, I usually have a laptop on my lap and my phone right next to me. I'm highly distractible. And I'm usually working while the show is going on. And that means that the ads have no chance of communicating anything to me. So, is my audience distracted, or are they on target? Are they focused on what I'm saying? So all of these things matter in terms of whether or not your persuasive appeal is going to be effective. Oh, this is a graphic that I found. Sorry, it's not a high quality image, but you really can see how these source factors like expertise, how trustworthy is the person, how likable, what kind of status or power do they have, how message factors like, is it a rational argument? Is it an emotional argument? Are you inducing a lot of fear or very little fear? What is the order of the arguments that you're presenting? And then audience factors. Does your audience need a lot of approval? What are their demographic characteristics like sex, age, race, religion, etc.? What's their self-esteem like? There are hundreds of audience factors that you could pay attention to. Those factors, source, message, and audience, then they have to be filtered through your capacity for paying attention, your ability to understand the message being sent to you, and your immediate level of acceptance. Like, in political seasons, when political ads are out all over the place, my tendency is to be highly open to certain kinds of messages, but immediately negative. So my acceptance would be immediately low for certain other kinds of messages. Like, I hate negative political ads. Hate them. So if somebody's going to hit me with that, my acceptance level is going to be superbly low. So that's a message factor that can drive acceptance really quickly. And then, after it's filtered through all of those things, then you can look at, are people's opinions actually moving? Are they changing? Are their perceptions of the issues changing? Is their mood, is their emotion changing? And all important, is their behavior changing? So that's really the components of the Yale attitude change approach. Now, the elaboration likelihood model kind of builds on some premises that are inherent to the Yale attitude approach, but takes it a step further. In this theory, which was proposed by Petty and Cacioppo in the 80s, and has continued to be investigated, looks at two basic ways in which persuasive communications can lead to attitude change. One pathway is the central route, and that involves getting people to elaborate on the communication that you're sending to them, getting them to listen very carefully, to think about arguments. This occurs when people have the ability to pay attention and they are highly motivated to listen to the communication. Excuse me. The alternative is the peripheral route. Peripheral route persuasion involves, the last thing you want your audience to do is to elaborate on arguments. You want them to just feel. You want them to be swayed by peripheral cues, surface characteristics. Central route persuasion really relies on content, on facts, on arguments, and wants people to buy the facts and the arguments and then shift their attitude to be consistent with them. The peripheral route, on the other hand, really wants to just capitalize on your emotions, to make you feel good if they want you to have positive emotion or positive attitudes, to make you feel fear or anger or hostility if they want you to have negative attitudes. So I'm going to give you some advertising examples. This example is a Super Bowl ad from a few years ago. And it is an example of peripheral route persuasion.
And there's your beautiful baby. Any day now.
Really? You're eating Doritos? He's eating Doritos on my ultrasound. what I have to do.
I know.
Give me that.
So the goal here with this Doritos ad is to make you laugh. So they're using a very familiar kind of situation, a familiar scenario, a little joke making at the expense of the husband in the ad, but it's intended to make you laugh. It was a very memorable ad. The reviews of it, the post Super Bowl reviews of all the advertisements, this was one that got a lot of positive buzz. So the whole goal of this type of peripheral ad is for the next time you're in the grocery store in the chip aisle, you're going to see that red bag for the Doritos and you're going to laugh. You might not remember why you're laughing, but you'll be laughing because you saw that ad. In contrast, Central Route ads are more like this one. So that ad didn't air in the United States. It was a a European ad for a Lenovo-based phone. I don't even think they make phones anymore. It was aired in Europe. It was designed for a European audience. And notice how many facts they gave you. I mean, how many millimeters thin the phone is, how many megapixels the camera is, and on and on and on. This is a very simple example of a Central Route Persuasion ad where they're seeking a particular kind of audience. And these are audience members who know what they're looking for and they want a product that meets those demands. So it's kind of like I mentioned in a previous video. If I'm going shopping for a pickup truck and I used to have horses, so one of my major considerations was, can I pull a horse trailer with this truck? My first question out of the block when I go to a car dealership is, what's the towing capacity of this truck? And dealers often look at me and they go, you want to know what now? You're sure you don't want to look at the vanity mirror? I'm like, no, I just want to know how many tons it can pull. And you need to tell me. So when we think about these two routes to persuasion, we also have to build in a set of assumptions about the motivation to pay attention to arguments. People differ greatly in terms of their ability and willingness to pay attention to what's being presented to them. If your motivation is low and people are trying to hit you with a high information Central Route ad, that's going to be problematic. At the same time, if you can get people motivated by making a topic or a product highly relevant to them personally, that makes them more motivated to pay attention. In political advertising, for example, it's very common to try and get people to see the personal relevance in the issues that the political candidate supports, to make it about them. And that can trigger intense motivation to pay attention to the rest of the message. And it may move people in that direction if they're highly motivated. The more willing people are to give their attentional time to the arguments, the more likely they are to take the Central Route. On the other hand, if people don't want to pay attention, or even if they do, sometimes it's just hard to do so. our environments are often noisy with too much information going on around us. So you could just be tired. You could be in an uncomfortable environment, and that can suck up your emotion, your motivation, and drive your emotions into a more negative space, making it hard to persuade you. It could also be the nature of the argument. Maybe the issue is really complicated. Like, I'm remembering back to the early days of the pandemic. It was a complex situation, and we were all being called upon to form attitudes about, say, mask wearing or vaccines in a very complex decision-making situation. That can really make it hard for people. If they are overwhelmed by the complexity of a situation, they may just punt on paying attention to the details. When people are unable to give that level of attention, whatever the reason is, they're much more persuadable by peripheral cues, emotional arguments. So the peripheral route to persuasion. So you may be thinking, how do we get people to make long-lasting attitude changes that can have long-standing impact on their behaviors? Your authors argue that base attitudes, or rather, let me start over, attitudes that are based on really deliberative thinking. So if you have directly chosen a central route where you are looking for data, you're looking for information so you can make the best decision possible, then that can produce long-standing changes in attitudes over time. Because what this does, if your attitudes are coming through that central route, then you're more likely to behave in a way that's consistent with that attitude. And then you reflect back on you yourself voluntarily making this choice based on good arguments. You're more likely to do so again. So when people can be compelled to use the central route, it can, it's more likely to push them in the direction of long-lasting attitude change. Because frankly, you have much more invested in it. You've spent a lot of time. You've invested your attention, your emotions, and you've made decisions, and then you've reflected on those decisions. That can produce a lot of long-standing change. And it makes people very resistant to change in the future as well. On the other hand, if your attitude was formed as a result of peripheral cues, where you haven't invested much time or thought, those are attitudes that can be pretty fleeting at times, unless they are tethered to deeply held values. If that peripherally produced attitude is connected to deeply held values, that can be very sticky. It can be very long-lasting. And in fact, you could form an attitude peripherally, see that it's connected to those values that you hold dear, and you may come up with a whole boatload of very concrete reasons that then you can use to bolster your feelings. So that's another way that long-lasting attitude change can be produced. Now, fear-arousing ads, I often see these in the political space. I often see them in public service announcements where you're trying to get people to engage in more healthy patterns of behaviors to prevent really bad outcomes. Persuasive messages that, hit my mouse too quickly. Persuasive messages that are designed to change behavior via their attitudes, using fear, is a tricky business because you have to be careful how much fear you're creating. If you're using a moderate amount of fear or discomfort, and people believe that listening to the message will teach them how to reduce their fear, and they're given a concrete way to reduce their fear, they're likely to be more motivated to carefully consider the arguments being made in the message. If the fear is too strong, too overwhelming, and people aren't given an easy way, a clear, direct pathway to reduce their fear, then they will become defensive. They'll deny the threat, they'll deny the importance of it, and they won't think rationally about the issue. So here's an example of a public service announcement. You've probably seen some of these ads. They've been out for several years now, and they're designed to encourage people to avoid behaviors that lead to cancer.
I'm married, and I used to be a smoker. I want to give you some tips about getting ready in the morning. Learn your name. Then your head redefined. And now you're ready for the night.
So this is an example of a public service announcement where they use, it's fear-inducing that you're seeing a real person who has gone through extensive treatment for cancer, ostensibly of the mouth and throat. She has facial scars, her hair is gone, she has a tracheostomy where she has to use a device to speak, and her voice is very robotic. The intention is for you to be fearful of that outcome if you are a smoker or if you're considering smoking or vaping. And then the closing scene has the web address or a phone call number that you can call to get advice about stopping smoking. Now, these are also ads that are designed, if you haven't smoked but you're considering it, or you haven't vaped but you're considering it, maybe your peer group is doing it, the ad is designed to make you think twice about that. Now, ads like this, they are a double-edged sword. In some cases, people just turn them off. It's like, that's not going to happen to me. I'm invincible. But for some people, it becomes very relevant. Seeing those super bad outcomes can sometimes encourage people to engage in avoidance behaviors, where they avoid the target, in this case, with this advertising campaign, of using tobacco. Now, here's another example. This was another Super Bowl ad, but this time it was more of a PSA, a public service announcement, and this was at a time when there was a component, a group of players, but also some aspects of the NFL that were trying to get on the message about domestic violence. So in this case, the ad is designed to be highly relevant to a texting population. I've had text conversations that were not all that unlike this one with friends and people that I know. And that's the intention of the No More organization, was to say, here's a really common situation. What are you going to do if you have a friend who's in this kind of context, in this kind of relationship? And then what they do is to give you the text number where you can get resources, either as the friend who's concerned or as the person who is in the situation. Here's a third example of a fear-arousing ad, and this one is from the presidential campaign in the first, it was the Trump versus Clinton political campaign.
She'll call 911. Average response time, 11 minutes. Too late. She keeps a firearm in this safe for protection, but Hillary Clinton could take away her right to self-defense. And with Supreme Court justices, Hillary can. Don't let Hillary leave you protected with nothing but a phone. The NRA Political Victory Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So in this case, this was an organization that was in favor of Donald Trump in that particular election, and the target market for the ad was women. And what they want people to see, they want them to feel afraid and vulnerable. They want them to feel like they are, potential crime victims, and that if you vote for Clinton, you're going to be leaving yourself defenseless because she's going to take away your guns. So in this case, what they wanted to do was to induce some fear, and then they're not allowed, the federal regulations at that time was the NRA can't say vote for Trump, but they can say things like don't let Hillary leave you defenseless. So they're telling you who to vote for without telling you who to vote for. And that's the method of inducing the fear and the worry, but here's how you reduce it. Don't let Hillary leave you defenseless. The heuristic systematic model of persuasion helps us to understand why these kinds of persuasion appeals actually function. So, explaining the two modes of communication and how they lead to attitude change, the assumption is that there's a systematic processing that we go through where we're trying to understand the merits of arguments. Now that tends to be more on the side of central root persuasion. An explanation of the two ways that persuasive communications can lead to attitude change really looks at when we're using peripheral root, like using fear or using mental shortcuts. Those sorts of things can kind of go through the side door and get us to move in the direction of the attitude that whoever's sending the message wants you to experience. So on the one hand, systematic arguments, that would come in the form of central root persuasion, whereas peripheral root is going to really capitalize on these mental shortcuts, like you're afraid, here's how you reduce your fear. And if you go that route, you're going to change your attitude in the direction of the thing that makes you less fearful. Or with the Doritos ad, if the heuristic is happiness comes in the form of Doritos, even unborn children know it, that kind of thing. Or if you're shopping for the best vacuum cleaner, you are going to systematically look at the merits of each product and then make a decision. That's central root. Now, emotion plays a huge role in this model of persuasive communication because emotions are often shortcuts, mental shortcuts that help us to decide how we feel about objects. So it determines that affective component of the attitude. If a message makes you feel good, you must have a positive attitude toward it. So if you laugh at the Doritos ad, you must think Doritos are pretty cool. If it makes you feel bad, like if you're watching a fear-based appeal and it makes you feel bad, therefore you must have a negative attitude. So in the anti-smoking ads, if you felt bad about what happened to the woman who's being profiled and you really don't want that outcome, you must have a negative attitude toward smoking. Now, the problem with the how do I feel about it heuristic is that you can make mistakes about what's actually driving your mood. We are capable, remember back to that misattribution of emotion example of the walking across the very unstable bridge. we can sometimes be tricked into feeling good about things that we otherwise wouldn't. Like Doritos, do you forget what that does? They're really kind of gross. They taste great at the time, but they permanently leave orange dye on your hands and everything else around you. You can make mistakes just based on a good feeling, or you can make mistakes based on a bad feeling. Like in fear-inducing political ads, for example, they can be so distracting that people won't dig down into the details. Like a political ad that says, such and such a candidate is going to set out. I remember this from one of the campaigns, not the most recent presidential campaign, but before that, there was this big fear campaign about death panels. The government's going to create these panels of people, and they're going to decide who lives and who dies. Well, no one was actually proposing that, but the ads were so distracting, they aroused so much fear and concern that people forgot to go back and fact check them. So sometimes people make bad decisions because the emotions that they're experiencing and the heuristics that they call upon are leading them in the wrong direction. Now, generally speaking, advertisers really want to pair their products with happiness. They want people to feel good about their products. And so they're going to use, appealing music. They're going to show pretty people. They're going to show beautiful landscapes. And their hope is that people will mistakenly attribute those positive feelings to the product itself. So, if it's a car company and they want you to have really good feelings about the car. So like I'm thinking of this one campaign that Subaru did for a while, where they had a cute couple and their cute dog, and they're going out on an adventure, and they drive to this really stunning location, and there they are with their cute dog, and they're cute, and they're happy, and they're laughing, and it's beautiful. And what the advertisers hope is that all of those happy thoughts that you've just had will translate into you feeling good about that product. And if you have that product, then you will have those happy experiences too. Now, attitudes of different kinds can prompt different kinds of emotions. Cognitively based attitudes, your best bet, if you're going to try and persuade people to change their mind, is to go at it with rational arguments. So if you know a person's attitude towards something, whatever object it is based on cognitions, and you want to change their mind, you cannot go at it with emotion. You have to go at it with rationality. This is very related to what are often called utilitarian objects, like vacuum cleaners, cars, computers, things like that. It's not so much about what they look like, but what they can do. If a person's existing attitude is affectively based, though, then you're better off going with emotion. Because especially if you're talking about what are called social identity products, like, are you an Apple person or are you an Android person? There are camps. So if the type of phone that you have is connected to your social identity, then it becomes very emotionally relevant to you, and hard for people to then move off of that object. More recent kinds of research has actually looked at the connection between attitude change and our experiences more physically, and our involvement with our physical environment. Your environment and even your posture can actually change the way you receive messages. So if you're sitting in a soft chair, as your authors note, at a computer store, like Apple doesn't go for this. If you've been to an Apple store, you know that they're not trying to make you comfortable. They want you to move in and out of their store as quickly as possible with really super uncomfortable hard stools. But let's say you have a store that wants you to feel comfortable. They want you to feel happy. They'll put you in a cushy chair. They'll make sure you have something to drink. They'll talk to you about your day and make you feel welcome. Then your comfort makes the idea of spending money on the product, even if it's more expensive than you had originally intended, more likely. So your physical state can actually move you in the direction of more positive attitudes if your physical state is positive. This is why we often train salespeople to tell jokes, to talk about interesting things that'll make people smile before they pitch you on a product. Those positive feelings can then translate into positive feelings towards the product that they're trying to sell. So basically, anything you can do to increase engagement with your audience can move them in the direction of agreeing with your message, as long as those arguments are strong and convincing in the first place. So that concludes my coverage of Learning Objective 7.3. In the next video, we'll move on to Learning Objective 7.4, and we'll talk about advertising.